Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Lion update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State, a Penn State football show presented by FanDuel. Make every moment more. I'm Tom Hannafin. Today, I'm joined by Joe DeLeone, great friend of the show within the Believe Podcast Network, one of the co-hosts of the Ruffino Joe Show, who does a tremendous amount of content covering college football at a national level. You guys do a tremendous job. I'm so happy about the success that you guys have had. And I wanted to have you on this week, Joe, as Penn State is in a bye week, sitting at number 2 in the country, 3-0 after a easy non-conference schedule. I'll say that. And now you're sitting at a weekend where number 1 Ohio State also on a bye. Oregon awaits Penn State after this bye week and the whiteout September 27th at night at home for Penn State in Happy Valley. So a lot of stuff to look forward to, but also a good opportunity to reflect on what Penn State has already put on tape, and then also kind of get the national perspective of what the rest of the country thinks about the Nittany Lions. So I want to start off with how you feel about what Penn State has put on tape thus far through those aforementioned non-con victories.
I think one of the funniest parts about talking about Penn State after 3 games where you play 3 nobodies.
Right.
There's no reason to try and hype up Villanova or FIU. I feel like they're, to a degree, has been a lot of almost overreaction to the way that they've performed. You've got all these other teams that are trying to figure out what their strengths and their weaknesses are. And Penn State hasn't had the same national spotlight. And there's just been a lot of almost dismissiveness because Allar hasn't been as clean as maybe some people have hoped. And there's maybe just been a couple of deficiencies. They hung around a little bit too much with FIU, and people want to overreact to that. I think also, as we have Ohio State earning an early signature victory against Texas and Oregon looking as dominant as they've been, it's put Penn State in a backseat. And I think we need to remind ourselves that as soon as they really enter that peak stretch of their schedule, that is when we're going to get to know what this Penn State squad is like. And it helps that they're getting thrown right into the fire of Big Ten play. There is no lead up. There's no Maryland. There's no Northwestern. You are given this opportunity to really prove, are you better than Oregon, which is getting a ton of national love, including from our show and Ruffino Joe Show. I'm really intrigued to see how that game is going to turn out.
I'll touch on what you mentioned as overreaction by Penn State fans. I will put myself in the camp of people that absolutely overreacted after the Villanova game. And I still stand by my overreaction because I think the standard has been set that this team will credibly contend for the national championship in 2025. According to FanDuel, Penn State has the second best odds to win the national championship still at the point of us recording this episode. And I sit here as someone who has watched every snap this season, watched every snap since I don't know how old I was. And, there's just no track record, unfortunately, for Penn State to win the proverbial big one over the last 9 years outside of the Big Ten championship game. But beating that top tier competition, that's what Oregon presents on September 27th. That's what Ohio State will present on November 1st. So to many Penn State fans, the expectation was in the non-con, you look like world beaters. And that's not what Penn State put on tape. If anything, the defense looked outstanding. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the defense, but the offense, you can give me the argument of, yes, they're trying to work on their depth. They're rotating guys in. They're trying to work on things, and they don't need things to be perfect from a coaching staff standpoint. But the outside perspective is, hey, it doesn't look like your offense is really going to be high-powered and high-scoring this year, and that is a huge concern going up against Oregon, which has all the indicators that it will be high-powered, it will be high-scoring. So those are the major concerns, I think, for Penn State fans. What's your evaluation? I want to start with the defense, but then I'll get to Allar and the offense after the fact.
Well, so the defense, I feel like is living up to the expectations already. And I know that you lose Abdul Carter, who is a tremendously gifted player. They still have all of these key guys coming back. One player who I've been really excited about, who's your leading tackler at the current moment, Amari Campbell. I was excited by his film coming from North Carolina, and I had a pretty favorable grade on him for the upcoming draft. Small guy, he's not your typical big pounding linebacker, but for him to have found the production that he has makes me really feel like I've been proven right that he has the potential with all of these surrounding pieces to find success. I also think one player, Denai Dennis Sutton, who there's been a lot of projection for him over the past 2 years before this season of he is incredibly physically gifted. He is powerful. He's explosive. He's one of those one-of-one prospects that fits into the rare category that we talk about. But he hasn't really actualized it yet. He hasn't actually put it all together. And I feel like right now we're starting to see that. We're starting to see the glimpses. If you're going to be that talented, kind of like what Abdul Carter started to do last year, if you're going to be that talented, you need to show up against these bad opponents and completely dominate them for the 3 quarters that you're playing, maybe even the half of a game that you're playing when you're on the field. And I think I'm starting to see that from Dennis Sutton. I think that his emergence is going to be so crucial, having a pass rusher like that when you have to go up against Oregon, you have to go up against these other top Big Ten teams, and then eventually, hopefully, if you get to the college football playoff. But I think that overall, we're seeing that there is tremendous talent on this defense. And I think that with a new defensive coordinator to hit the ground running the way that they have already is pretty strong with Knowles taking over.
I do have to ask out of curiosity, the NFL draft nerd in me is asking, who do you compare Denai Dennis Sutton to from maybe not in like, oh, he's going to be this, but just from a physical athletic makeup? He is a unique prospect.
That is a really tough question because he was one of the few guys over the summer that like physically he's hard to make that like direct one-to-one comparison to, because he's enormous. He's listed at 265, so he's got like this gigantic frame. I don't know if I have a direct comp, to be completely honest, without just spitting out a name.
He's tough to compare. Like he's
right.
Not a unicorn by any means, but there's a length to him, length only, that reminds me of Myles Garrett in terms of wingspan. I don't think he has the same traits, same gifts. And there's a little Daniel Hunter in him. I don't know. There's a lot to him.
Daniel Hunter's not a bad one. That actually probably be the best one. Garrett is in such a rare categoady that's
I want to say that's a wingspan comp only. And that's no disrespect to DDS. It's just like when I see his wingspan and his height and his weight, his weight's probably add 10 or 20 pounds. I think that's a roster attempt to be like, oh, he's a little smaller than you think. I mean, you're stunned in person.
Right. This is kind of a rushed comparison that I'm like trying to rack my brain on. Maybe like a Bradley Chubb wouldn't be a bad one because they're both in that 270 range, 6'4", 6'5" and Chubb's been tremendous so far during his early NFL career. That would probably be the best one off the top of my head without really digging into it.
Yeah, he's unique and he's fun to watch for those reasons. To the point that you made about Jim Knowles, what did you expect to see from Penn State's defense in the non-conference, and did you see it?
Well, one thing that I found really interesting reading and seeing comments from, which I try to avoid reading comments because they're often
it's probably best.
Negative. Yeah. Ohio State fans, which we have a very large contingency of Ohio State fans that tune into our show, and some of our top listeners are Ohio State fans. And they all swore when this exchange happened, Jim Knowles takes too long to implement his defense. Be prepared for there to be headaches and for this to be a mess. You guys are going to deal with, or Penn State's going to deal with a lot of headaches. It's just not going to be smooth. He's a guy that is a multi-year developer of defenses. And I always rejected that notion. I always thought that didn't make any sense to me because this is a very different situation that Knowles is stepping into compared to what he had when he was jumping in at Ohio State. He took over an Ohio State defense that was really shaky. It was having a lot of problems. Instead, you have in this spot one of the best defenses from last year that has a lot of loaded talent. They just needed to be set up more effectively to succeed. And I think that the fact that they're already seeing such dominance and they're not getting caught off guard, maybe by a big play here or there by FIU or Nevada, it wasn't going to happen against Villanova, but to have the already immediate dominance against this 3-game stretch, I think should provide optimism. But we're not going to know for certain until that game against Oregon.
Yeah, more on Oregon in a little bit. The defense of Penn State up against the offense of Oregon, I think, is the matchup to watch there. But as I mentioned, I want to address what Penn State has done offensively in the first non-conference games, 3 non-conference games, that is. The rushing game has looked about as expected. I think there's some Penn State fans who wanted to see better production. Mm-hmm. Nick Singleton, I think, is really being challenged by this coaching staff and running back coach Stan Drayton to round out his game. And I know there's a lot of people who said, oh, that's that's condemning almost the job that Jawan Sider had been doing for many years at Penn State. He's now off at Notre Dame. But I think it just speaks to what Nick Singleton really is as a running back, is that he has that straight line speed, but he doesn't break through contact very well. He has the home run ability. And I said this midway through last year. I thought Katron Allen had exceeded Nick Singleton and was the number one running back, or at least the most reliable and productive running back for Penn State football. These two are going to finish as 1 and 2 all-time rushing for Penn State football, which is just incredible. But have you seen what you were expecting to see out of the running game for Penn State?
Well, I think that this is one of these circumstances where, and this aligns with a lot of my thoughts on the Penn State offense, I don't think that we've seen what the full expectation, the full scope of what Kotelnicki wants to do this year. I think that we're kind of just getting like surface level through the first 3 games, that maybe to a degree you're not trying to go over the top with setting up Singleton for all these big explosives. I know that their production, that we're starting to get such a big gap of separation between Allen and Singleton, where he's out rushing him by so much and he's got less carries than him, which is kind of crazy to me. But I understand where that thought comes from, because Allen's got much better vision. And I think that when you watch Singleton on tape, he's such a good athlete, but at times the ability to maneuver and to navigate rushing lanes just isn't there. He's so explosive in a straight line, not super fluid sometimes at changing direction. And I also think that he's one of these players where he sees a hole, he's just going to run straight at it. He's never going to really feel out as the play's happening, which isn't bad. It kind of reminds me a lot of Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. And I think Singleton's a lot better than Donovan Edwards, but it kind of reminds me of that pairing where Corum's not the better athlete, but because of his instincts, he's always going to be the relied on player in tight situations. And he is going to be the player who is probably going to get maybe the primary carries at a certain point. But having a weapon like Singleton is always going to be advantageous for somebody like Kotelnicki.
State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. I think that's a really good comp, to be honest, that Michigan team. I think that there's a lot of similarities, especially in the running game. The offensive line has been working with a lot of different groupings, so seeing what they'll eventually work with consistently, I'm very curious about. Oregon will be a primary indicator of that. And then you have a chance in October to kind of collect yourself. You're at UCLA, a beleaguered UCLA team. You host Northwestern. You go to Iowa. Iowa just doesn't look like Iowa, which is kind of heartbreaking, I think, for a lot of college football fans. You'd like to see them have a little bit more punch, and then you get a bye week, then you get Ohio State. So there's a lot still for Penn State to work out, I think, mid-October especially. I'll come to Drew Allar in the passing game. One, how do you feel about the 3 transfer wide receivers and the passing game at large? And 2, do you think there's something wrong with Drew Allar?
I think with the receivers, very first to get to that, I'm not worried because it takes time to build chemistry. I think that there's already some promising signs that this group is going to be better than last year. I think that there's a little bit more explosiveness to be had with Pena and Hudson and Ross so far. The production, you obviously want more. You're hoping to have one of these guys to be over 300 yards with the 3 games and the 3 opponents that they've had. I think that when you have, especially Pena coming in as late as he did, there's going to be a feeling out period. And I think that then pivots over and turns over to Allar, who has been a slow grower. He's been a slow progressor. He has not been this rapid riser. He's been somebody who is year by year shown improvement. It wasn't going to be an overnight clicking that they were just going to be throwing for 400 yards and that they were going to be unstoppable and they were going to be this big explosive powerhouse. I think that this is the big area where Penn State fans need to really express patience. It is a lot to ask and to assume after losing Tyler Warren and having we're talking about 3 brand new receivers being the primary targets in this offense. We're not talking about one dude who came in. We're not talking about 2 guys who came in. We're talking about 3 brand new guys coming in to start and to lead this squad. I think that as this the season starts to evolve, that is when we're going to see what this team is capable of. It happens all the time in college football. I think a really good example, by the way, of what part of what I addressed earlier, where Kotelnicki probably isn't showing us everything. First 2 weeks of Georgia, everybody was saying this team is unexplosive. Gunnar Stockton's not throwing past the sticks. His yards per attempt is one of the worst in college football. He's incredibly timid. I think that we were proven that that wasn't true after the first play. He took a shot, and the whole game against Tennessee was deep shot after deep shot. I think that there's a lot more that can be had knowing Kotelnicki's this mad scientist to activate the group, and there's just a little bit of a feeling out that needs to come with it. To get very specific with Allar, though, I feel like his problems are very similar to what we knew about him in the past. I think that what was frustrating talking about him this offseason is expectation and reality didn't really meet with Drew Allar. Yep. And I'm not trying to be negative about him, but there was a crowd of people that were making him out to be this otherworldly, guaranteed first overall pick type of a guy, some like Andrew Luck-esque prospect that's so physically gifted that he's gonna figure it out and everything is gonna be so great. And I don't think that really met the reality of a guy who was late to becoming a quarterback, who wasn't even a 5-star until really late in his recruiting process, and has improved every single year, but still is learning how to play the quarterback position and learning how to establish his instincts. So I'm not surprised that it's a little slow to get going again. I think that he could still get better, and I think that there's some positives to be taken away, but it all comes back down to being patient. We're only in week 4.
It's the fascinating thing about football as it is right now, because we're seeing how much at the NFL level people being like, well, why aren't these rookie quarterbacks working out? And it feels like when you and I were kids that it's like, hey, you drafted a guy and then you sat him for a year, maybe 2, and then you could see a guy really develop. And it's like, Jordan Love in Green Bay sitting behind Aaron Rodgers for a little bit. Tom Brady sitting behind Drew Bledsoe many, many years ago. I feel like that will be the best situation for Drew Allar whenever he goes pro. If you start him immediately, it will flame out quickly, because he has shown in the first 3 games, and it's something that frustrated me to the point I compared him to Christian Hackenberg, is that he has physical gifts, but his processing capability is still very much a work in progress. The touchdown pass he threw to Trebor Pena against Villanova, an insane throw that I will say a Big Ten SEC secondary might have picked off, but an FCS opponent did not, and he threads the needle. He can throw some things that remind me of Jeff George, especially those flag routes to the outside. They're really, really impressive. He'll do that, and then there's these head-scratching moments. That's why I bring up the Hackenberg comparison. Sometimes the accuracy goes, and you're like, what is going on here? And I heard some valuable feedback from within the Penn State community, is that it's like, you know what? Penn State fans are looking at this year as this is the year Penn State can win the national championship for the first time in nearly 40 years. He's not going to change. He is who he is. Bo Perbula is not going to come and save you or something like that. This is the team you're taking to the dance. So I guess that begs the question, from what you've seen thus far, Penn State, do you feel like they can still credibly win it all this year?
I think that it's still on the table. And I think that partly because it's too early to truly determine that they're incapable of getting there. The only way that we're going to find out is, I don't know, this is a little bit of a non-answer. It's like by the time maybe week 10 comes around is going to be when we're going to be able to tell, because Penn State's got a favorable schedule. So even if they lose to Oregon, there's plenty of time for them to self-evaluate and try to fix things. I think that what's often assumed is that it's required for teams to get to the national title to just be perfect right off the bat, and to have the All-American quarterback who's in the Heisman Trophy conversation. The team that Penn State has drawn comparisons to going into this season, and because they followed the same approach, was last year's Ohio State team. They did the same. It's not direct one-on-one comparison, but And having a lot of your key important players that could have declared last season decide to come back is why it's similar.
True.
And the thing that we had with that Ohio State team, Tom, is that we have Will Howard, who was fine. He was just above average enough that they were able to win games. He wasn't their most important player. It was the defense. It was the run game. It was Jeremiah Smith. There's no Jeremiah Smith on this team, but every other position group for Penn State is loaded. As long as Allar is able to just keep the offense on schedule and the run game can be as explosive as it can, and Kotelnicki doesn't get in his own way, which he kind of did in the Orange Bowl. It felt like abandoning the run game a little too early, despite Notre Dame having so much success slowing down, or Penn State having so much success running the ball against Notre Dame is what I meant to say. But I think that there is still a lot of time for things to be resolved. And I think that them winning a national title is 1,000% on the table, knowing how close they got last year.
I completely agree with the concept of run the ball, play outstanding defense. A lot of similarities to, I would say, both of the last two national champions in Ohio State and Michigan. I think Drew Allar has more gifts in the passing game than JJ McCarthy, so I'm not trying to make that direct comparison by any means. I think he actually has better weapons in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
This is going to come out odd, but I think it's appropriate. Drew Allar is a sexy game manager.
I think that you put that perfectly. I think he is more impactful as a passer than Will Howard and JJ McCarthy. Like that should spark promise. You don't need him to be perfect. We saw both of those guys make egregious errors for their teams, and they still went on to win national championships.
Yeah.
So that's where the problem is. It all comes down to is if you put too much on his shoulders and you ask him to be Superman, the results are not going to be there. And I keep coming back to the Orange Bowl was the one game. I've talked to many Notre Dame people about this. After that game, it was like, why stop giving the ball to Singleton? Why stop leaning on your run game so much? Why did they approach that third and fourth quarter the way that they did? If they stay within their realm, Kotelnicki keeps doing what he does, they're able to win that title.
Well, it's in the past. Looking forward, Penn State still has the second best odds to win the national championship, according to FanDuel. I do want to get your outlook on the Oregon game. That also, according to FanDuel, right now the spread is in the favor of the Nittany Lions, -3.5. That's dropped from 4.5. I wouldn't be shocked if that dropped another point or at least half a point by the time that we actually do get to September 27th. That game at night on NBC in a whiteout. I think we kind of touched on it earlier. This feels to me like Penn State's outstanding defense and run game up against what Dante Moore and this offense can do in the passing game and running the football, just a very explosive offense. I guess if this turns into a track meet, can Penn State keep up with Oregon?
So I think in that very specific question, if it does become a track meet, I'm taking Oregon. I think that Dante Moore within Will Stein's offense is explosive enough that if they do separate by a touchdown or 10 points, they also then have the ability to pivot and lean on their run game. They've got a tremendous offensive line, despite some retooling with guys going to the NFL, and they've got an awesome defensive line that is very, very deep. But at the current moment, and I haven't really dug into this matchup because we're going to do our preview for it next week, but at the current moment, I do lean Penn State. And there's one area that I've I've ignored, and I've learned that I need to continue to focus on it, is picking against teams that have young starting quarterbacks on the road. And as much as Dante Moore has looked fantastic, we both need to sit here and recognize the massive, difficult task that Dante Moore is going to have at Penn State, his first real road environment. It is going to be tough for him. Even if he plays his best game, I think that it would be insane if he were able to get out of there without turning the ball over. And if he does, he should win the Heisman. Legitimately, he should win the Heisman. It is a massive, difficult task that he is going to have to survive through. So at the current moment, for that specific reason, I think that this Penn State defense can do enough to fluster him that they can end up winning a close one.
On top of that, it's the most important whiteout in 6 years. It's legitimately a whiteout for Penn State at night against Penn State's best home opponent of the season, and it's not being disrupted by television networks in a time slot, NBC.
Right.
All Penn State fans are very grateful for that. So does Dante Moore get the Shea Pattersons? We're going to have to see. I'm very excited about that game. Joe, thank you so much. If you haven't already, check out the Ruffino and Joe Show wherever you get your podcasts. They do a tremendous job covering everything in college football, and I have said it many times. State of State, this podcast platform would not be possible without the efforts of Joe DeLeone over the years. It's why we have over 1 million downloads, and we're seen and heard in 122 countries and counting. So thank you very much, Joe. We appreciate it. Thank you for tuning into State of State, a Penn State football show presented by FanDuel. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel for just 99 cents a month. You can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by FanDuel.